The It franchise is one of the most enduring within the entirety of horror media. Pennywise the Clown is not too dissimilar from Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, or Michael Myers, all thanks to the gargantuan novel released in 1986. And after finally reading it for myself only recently, I realized that the adaptations it has gotten haven't really done the story justice. I should probably explain myself. So within the last year or so, I've been getting more into reading for the first time since high school. I, like many of you, I'm sure, grew a distaste for the activity during school since it forces unhealthy reading habits onto children, which makes reading less fun and more of a chore. But for the first time in years, I've been having a blast with my books, and I've been having a blast reading Stephen King. Even though I've only finished my first King book, Pet Sematary, last June, I've enjoyed his stories since I was a child with the film adaptations of his work. I've said it before, I'll say it again, but Stand By Me is still my all-time favorite film. As much as I love horror, that movie just speaks to me on such a profound level. Lest we forget The Shining, The Mist, The Shawshank Redemption, The Green Mile, Misery, and the list goes on and on and on and on. Hell, I even enjoy Maximum Overdrive and Pet Sematary too. Admittedly, for all the wrong reasons.
This machine just called me an asshole!
But probably the first time Mr. King ever scared me was with
Pennywise the Dancing.
It has always been a staple of my formative years as a horror fan. The miniseries scared the hell out of me, yet I still watched it a lot. I could have easily just watched Fairly OddParents under my blankie with my dummy, but I soldiered through this 3-hour-long behemoth on several occasions, and I always wanted to read the 1100-page monster of a novel it was based on. My older sibling had a copy of the old paperback, and they said I could read it after they were done with it, but it took them so long to read it that by the time I asked for it, they somehow lost it. I don't know how they did that considering how much of a unit that book was even in paperback, but I digress. So I always wanted a copy for myself, and 2 years ago in the thick of the pandemic, I bought one from Amazon and it proceeded to spend about 2 years on my shelf within my video games because I found it way too daunting. But after finishing Pet Sematary, I decided to throw myself into the deep end, and within about 2 months, I read through it, though I could have been faster if I was less on and off with it, and if I was just a faster reader. But I thoroughly enjoyed it despite a few flaws. And it got me to reevaluate the film adaptations of this story, all of which I had watched prior. Hell, Bill Skarsgård is even on the cover of my copy of the book, and I at the very least enjoyed all of the attempts at it despite their flaws. But now I view them in a different light. And I thought a retrospective of these films was in order with my newfound knowledge of the town of Derry, Maine, and the monster that dwells beneath it. Though I stress, this won't be a video comparing the differences between the book and films, as videos like that already exist, and of course there'll be differences, since it's being transferred from one medium to another, let alone with different writers and directors, different takes on the original text. But if I think something was done better in the book, I'll point it out when necessary. Beginning in 1990, we have the legendary miniseries made by ABC. But before we dive in, I must warn you all that there will be spoilers for the book and all adaptations of it in this video. So click off now to avoid spoiling your pants. Spoiler alert, I think there's a clown. 10 years after Lawrence D. Cohen wrote the script for the 1976 adaptation of King's first published novel, Carrie, to great success, he was tapped to write a version of King's at the time new novel, It, for television. He recalled having a delivery guy give him boxes and boxes full of manuscript for him, and realizing what a huge undertaking it would be. George Romero was involved very early on, and at first the miniseries was going to be divided into 4 2-hour blocks, but ABC got cold feet about having it be that long, instead making it 2 2-hour blocks. And they had reservations about having Romero involved to begin with, considering the very gory nature of the man's work. So he decided to leave and work on the 1990 remake of his classic Night of the Living Dead. Unfortunately, this isn't the first time this happened, as Romero was going to direct the film adaptation of Pet Sematary, but had to leave the project to work on Monkey Shines, and he was going to be involved with the 1994 miniseries for The Stand. It's a real shame because these were all adaptations that would have greatly improved from his involvement. Tommy Lee Wallace then took over as director. You may know him for his work on several John Carpenter flicks. He even directed Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, and played Michael Myers in the classic closet scene from the original film. When he took over, he also rewrote the second part of the miniseries to be more in line with the book. The movie starts and wastes no time by showing Pennywise wasting a little girl in a fairly underwhelming off-screen kill. yeah, that's something you have to get used to with this miniseries. Given the fact that this was made for primetime television, you couldn't really show much of anything involving scares, kills, and gore. For example, they couldn't have blood come out of a human orifice, so they really went to town on scenes like having blood come out of Georgie's photo album and Beverly's sink. This was something King had anticipated himself, and was the reason why the man had very little hope for any television adaptations of his work. In 1983, he said, and I quote, "The format is so institutionally faint-hearted and unimaginative to handle real horror." Despite the success of the Salem's Lot miniseries in 1979, an adaptation King himself liked, that miniseries still delivers the chills fairly well with good music and some cheap but well done effects. Admittedly, I'm not a huge fan of it, but that's mainly because Salem's Lot didn't really do much for me when I read it, despite it containing some of King's all-time scariest passages. But the miniseries is still pretty good for 70s made-for-TV standards, and it was a worthy adaptation of the source material, despite some dumb things here or there. Ben, you clumsy bitch! And after the It miniseries was greenlit, he had the same low opinion as before. He said, and I once again quote, "My expectations are in the basement. Here is a book that sprawled over 1,000 pages, and they were going to cram it into 4 hours with commercials." And I kind of agree. It is such an expansive piece of literature, and to cram it into 3 hours or so is kind of insulting. And watching the miniseries after reading the book, I feel like I'm getting the Cliff Notes version. But thankfully, they knew what kind of feature they were making from the outset, and they could focus on the coming of age angle a bit more and attack the spookier stuff in a different way and not be as over the top with it as it was in the book. The only thing to my knowledge that was cut for being too intense for TV audiences was the scene where a fireman brings to Denborough's Georgie's corpse, missing arm and all. But besides that, nothing had to be cut or anything, though not for lack of trying. ABC tried to have it re-edited for a tamer cut, but thankfully Tommy Lee Wallace and company stood their ground and it was released as is. They just put a warning before the broadcast. Mike Hanlon is at the resulting crime scene of the little girl, and after finding a picture of Georgie, he takes the initiative to call his old friends and get the band back together. One by one and somewhat redundant scenes that all end up the same way. They feel like boring interludes you must sift through to get to the stuff with the kids, and while yes, the book also jumps back and forth between time periods, King didn't half-ass it in the book. The time jumps and different perspectives were consistent and told one huge story. Meanwhile, the miniseries tells smaller stories one after another. It lacks the cohesion that could be found in the original work. By the end of the book, you're jumping from 1958 to 1985 within a span of a few pages, to even a few paragraphs depending on the chapter. In doing this, King could really showcase the similarities of both fights with Pennywise and how they all came full circle by the end. But in part 1 of this miniseries, we start to get used to our cast of losers, and then we're thrown into the exploits of a boomer who likely needs his ED medication. The pacing feels incredibly messy despite going for something so formulaic. The obvious commercial breaks don't help either, and they really hammer in the points that this was made for television. I understand this was a necessity, but couldn't they at least re-edit it for home video? It wouldn't have even been that hard if it had all the original assets. Salem's Lot did this much better, even though it was also a miniseries made for television. It would end with scares instead of just a boring fade to black for the most part. It felt so much more cinematic and less cheap. Though, all that put aside, the first part of this miniseries has aged okay, all things considered, and it can still be entertaining to watch. Surprisingly enough, a big reason for this was the fantastic child cast, including Jonathan Brandis, may he rest in peace, as Bill, Emily Perkins as Beverly, Brandon Crane as Ben, Seth Green as Richie, Adam Farazel as Eddie, and Ben Heller as Stan. And they're good, especially by 90s TV movie standards. And that's because they made sure the kids had time to bond and become friends. So in the ensemble scenes, they're not even acting that much. Jonathan Brandis especially kills it, acting through a stutter the whole time, which is really commendable.
It's scared of us, you know? I can feel that. I swear to God I can. I want to kill it.
Though, of course, how can I not mention my man, Tim Curry, as Pennywise? Even those who despise this miniseries have to give props to this casting. Curry is animated and chews the scenery to such a great extent. It feels like he comes right off the page at points.
Won't do any good to run, girly boy. See you in your dreams. Oh, come back anytime. Bring your friends.
They were originally considering either Alice Cooper or Malcolm McDowell, and those are two very interesting choices that probably could have turned out well, even though Alice's previous acting experience doesn't exactly inspire confidence.
Thank you, sir. May I have another?
But you can't beat Tim Curry's iconic performance. They didn't even put much makeup on him. They thought they would have to use a bunch of prosthetics to make him look spooky, but after Curry worked on the film Legend, he wasn't exactly up to the task of wearing that much prosthetics again, because it was fucking hell. So they only put prosthetics on his nose, and I believe on his head to make it look like he has that big brain. And besides that, they just let Tim Curry be Tim Curry, which was definitely the right move. Also, this doesn't have much to do with anything, but as a kid, I for some reason thought that the red wig they put on him was Tim Curry's real hair that they dyed and messed with for it to look like that. I have no real reason as to why I might have thought that. I was either very impressionable or very stupid. Likely both. Also, I should mention, as much as I love Tim Curry's performance as Pennywise, he is not very scary. I know some of you may be screaming at me right now about all the nightmares Mr. Frankenfurter gave you as a child, and I understand that. I as a kid had nightmares for years because of the Wicked Witch of the West from The Wizard of Oz, but I'll chalk that up to kids being kids. And kids are dumb. I wouldn't even blame Curry because he can be downright menacing at times. It's mainly the script, effects, and direction. Like, dude, this Pee-wee's Playhouse shit is not gonna cut it. Yes, this was made for television, so I'm not gonna compare it to The Shining or something like that. So again, Salem's Lot. I was surprised at how tense and creepy a lot of the scenes from this miniseries still are. I mean, it's the most iconic and scary scene, doesn't even involve its story's villain, Kurt Barlow. All it has is some creepy music, a fog machine, some simple editing tricks, and well-executed tension. You don't need all the blood and gore and numerous jump scares. As long as you have good atmosphere and tension, you'll be surprised at what you can accomplish. This is something they try sometimes, but the set design or effects often look too cheap, the performances let it down, or they sometimes do something so silly that it takes away from any tension the scene might have had. Take the most iconic scene with Pennywise and Georgie. It's so sunny, and Tony Dakota's portrayal of Georgie is unfortunately an exception to how good the child performances in this miniseries are.
I'm not supposed to take stuff from strangers. My dad said so.
Nothing against the actor, I'm sure I would have been far worse at that age, but it doesn't help the fact that it kind of ruins the scene. God, and the fact that every scene with a kill ends with these awful cross dissolves, it feels like a soap opera. They didn't have to rip the poor kid's arm off, but maybe have Pennywise drag him into the drain with no blood, or jump cut right here to a fireman bringing the Denbros George's body. Either of those would have worked so much better, and there's plenty of things they could have done with the other kills. It feels really lazy and safe. It doesn't help that so many of the scenes that are supposed to be scary are shot in daytime, or even when it's supposed to be dark, it's extremely well lit. Like, how is a sewer this bright, dude? Though the one scene I think is kinda scary is when Stan goes into the house with Pennywise as the mummy in the second part. It's starkly lit, you barely even get a good look at Pennywise as the mummy, and it's tense. It's not as scary as the book, but considering in the book it's dead children Stan sees, I won't hold that against it. And while yes, it's a bit silly with Stan saying the names of birds to get away,
the only thing he could think of to do was to hold his bird book out in front of him like a shield and say as loud as he could the names of all the birds he could remember.
European swallow!
that was also in the book. And it makes sense when you don't take it out of context. Doug Walker. It works because he believes in it. Simple as that. You can argue it's silly and King should have done something else, but you can't say it doesn't make sense. And since Stan doesn't have much else going on besides his bird watching, I'm not sure what else he could have done. I mean, he's Jewish, sure, so I guess he could have sang Dreidel, 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 but his family doesn't even keep kosher, so I doubt that would work either. The original soundtrack by Richard Bellis is really well done too. There's a lot of super memorable motifs and themes here, and they're iconic. Besides Tim Curry, the first thing I think of when this miniseries comes to mind is its theme. It's so good. Bellis won an Emmy for his work, and it was 100% deserved if you ask me. Though the inclusion of music by The Impressions and Temptations makes it feel incredibly corny and out of place. It also gives cheap soap opera vibes. Look, they're friends! Don't forget they're friends, people! Look at how friendly they are! But yeah, the first part is fine overall. As an adaptation, it's pretty good despite some weird character choices, like Henry being a bit too gung-ho to kill the losers, even though he isn't shown to be under its control like in the book, even though he's got an N-word pass.
Or what, boy? Or what?
Oh, no, you don't.
Also, on a funnier note, the Winter Fire poem kinda doesn't work now since both actresses are brunettes. But like I said, it's fine. It's boring at points, but it could have been much worse. Speaking of much worse, oh boy, now the second part is ass. Part of that is the fact that the second half of this story is just harder to adapt in general. Hint, hint. But also the writing has taken a hit, and it's nowhere near as good due to Tommy Lee Wallace rewriting it because Lawrence D. Cohen's original script was apparently too different to the original work. And in a shocking turn of events, the actors portraying the grown-up losers aren't as good as the kids. How did that happen?
Georgie. How could I have forgotten? I'm so sorry.
The performances are pedestrian, melodramatic, and so many line deliveries are just funny. But then again, how are you supposed to work with dialogue like this?
Why is it doing this? Why does it hate? Why is it so mean?
I believe this is because Tommy Lee Wallace's directing style was described as, quote, minimalist, and he didn't really, well, direct his actors. And even the best actors need a good director to be on their A game. So when he's not telling people to try something else or deter poor acting choices, we have an uneven cast and I have a hard time connecting them to their younger counterparts. I think the kids kinda got away with it because they had time to bond and become friends, and you could tell they were trying their best, and they had a better script to work with. And Tim Curry persevered because he's Tim Curry. The man's a freak of nature. For the older losers, we have Richard Thomas as Bill, Annette O'Toole as Beverly, John Ritter as Ben, Harry Anderson as Richie, Dennis Christopher as Eddie, Tim Reed as Mike, and Richard Macer as Stan. Though you don't really see much of him because I assume to make it up to him, they made it so his head and not Ben Heller's young Stan comes back later to taunt the rest of the gang. Which doesn't make sense because they don't know what Stan as a 40-year-old man looks like. They only knew him as a child. So from their point of view, they're just getting yelled at by some random old white dude.
You know what? It's true what they say. We all float down here, and you will too. In fact, they all float. They all float. Oh shit, it's a white guy!
The main problem with the script is Tommy Lee Wallace tries to fit in so much information into 90 minutes. Unfortunately, he chooses to do this by telling and not showing. So much of the runtime is made up of boring conversations relating lore and other random exposition dumps, a lot of which aren't even necessary, like Ben's diatribe about losing weight. Don't get me wrong, I like this characterization fine, but maybe cut it out if 99% of the runtime is made up of boomers talking. Speaking of characterization, Tommy Lee Wallace makes some weird choices, like making Beverly a thirsty bitch.
What a bunch of handsome old men. I fell in love with all you guys that day.
And now I know what this reminds me of, and what it's probably reminding you all of, even if you've never read the original book, and I really hope he isn't alluding to what I think he's alluding to.
Underage gangbang.
I can somewhat forgive Uncle Steven for doing what he did because by 1986, King was a walking baggie of cocaine. But Tommy, you didn't need to include this, buddy. It's just uncomfortable. Even when you take out the scene from the book, this is still just weird and hard to watch. Also, Bill, you're married, you ass! Richie ranges from annoying to downright repugnant. He's even more of a carrot since when he was a kid.
Oh, come on. Guys, what the hell are you gonna do now? Sing Kumbaya? Wake up. Take a breath. You smell that? That's
Dead person in the Suicide Forest?
He makes all these awful jokes that are never funny.
I don't know about you. I just flew in from L.A., boy, and boy, is my tail section tired. Yeah, not a chance. We're hot tonight. It's great to be back in Derry, breathing in that old Derry air.
And even worse, he makes said terrible jokes at the absolute worst times.
He thrusts his fist against the post and still insists he sees the ghosts. That's all it says over and over and over again.
My mom gave me that to say to help with my stutter.
no offense, pal. It ain't helping.
Shut the fuck up! Yes, Richie is a class clown type. That's part of his character. But he was never this tone deaf. It low-key pisses me off because Richie is probably my favorite character from the book. but he loses his depth as a character completely because of this second part alone. He was fine in the first part because of better writing and because Seth Green actually did well. And making Eddie a Volcel was certainly a choice.
I mean, I've never even been with any...
Eddie, what are you saying? You're a virgin?
Yeah.
Well, I can't help you with that, pal, but thanks for sharing.
Richie, shut the fuck up!
I could never sleep with somebody that I didn't love. And I've never really loved anyone. Except you guys.
I'm not sure what they were going for besides the fact they love each other, but that could have been accomplished in other ways, to say the least. That didn't need to make one of the losers a Redditor. There's also weird things that build up, like Mike being in flashbacks even though timeline-wise he shouldn't be there. They say not to split up, only to immediately split up anyway.
Dan, don't go alone.
I need a refill anyway.
I'll join you.
I'll take care of Reggie. Okay, we meet back here in 3 minutes. No more. Keep your doors open.
They try and have a tense scene with Mike getting stabbed while Eddie is nonchalantly brushing his teeth.
I'll pay you back. So we'll pay you all back.
Also, you can see the camera equipment's reflection in this scene, and I just think that's kind of charming. Oh, and of course,
spiders! A giant legion of spiders!
Yeah, even those who've seen this miniseries all know about the lame-ass spider at the end of this thing. Even though it technically isn't a spider because it has 6 legs. And look, I love good practical effects. The Thing, The Fly, Hellraiser, Evil Dead. Get that shit in me. I love it. But this is not good practical effects. The first problem is the somewhat ridiculous spacey design, which is harder to pull off in live action. In the book, it was a black garden spider, and I imagine that would have been far easier to do. In the documentary they made about this miniseries, they said they had champagne ideas, but a beer budget. And it's a shame because looking at some behind the scenes footage, you can tell it could do way more than what was shown off in the final edit. But the end product unfortunately leaves us with a giant hemorrhoid that has grown legs. And even how they fight it seems kind of half-baked. Tommy Lee Wallace said the novel's ending is unfilmable with the ritual of Chud and everything, and he may have a point, but people said the same thing about another King novel, Gerald's Game. Mike Flanagan rose to the occasion with a Netflix adaptation a few years ago, and I thought he did well. I'm sure they could have done something more creative with it and not just omit it entirely. At the very least, they could have had Tim Curry still delivering his lines like Pennywise did in the book, or have Tim in the clown garb when they go to rip his heart out. It lacks a sense of cohesion when we seemingly have an entirely different villain within the last few minutes. Even Tim wasn't amused by it.
One thing I loathed was what they did with him at the end. They made him into this awful plastic spider, which wasn't scary at all.
So yeah, as a whole, the miniseries isn't that good. Your nostalgia lied to you. The first part is okay, but damn, the second one is terrible, despite a few highlights.
Kiss me, fat boy.
Don't worry, Ben. Pennywise is technically a female in the book, so it ain't gay. But I guess you can still have some fun with it. Curry is a fun time, and the spider is fun to laugh at, and it's fine as an adaptation of the original work, which I assume is why Mr. King liked it so much, since being faithful to his work seems to be all he cares about sometimes. And it's retained a large fan base. It's an iconic piece of television and is still a big reason why people hate clowns to this very day. It's left a lasting impression, and Tim Curry's portrayal of Pennywise is still horror legend. I just wish he had a better miniseries to go along with his performance. It was so popular that there was an Indian adaptation called Whoa, which looks wild, but was apparently too niche for Indian audiences. It's on YouTube, but it's obviously not in English and there's no subtitles, but I can still get somewhat of an idea, I guess. Not like I would watch it anyway, it's 52 episodes long, Jesus. In 2004, WB almost did a remake of it for TV after Salem's Lot with Rob Lowe did well, and in 2006, Sci-Fi announced they're going to remake it as well, but neither project got off the ground. In 2009, Warner Brothers announced they were going to adapt it with a full-blown theatrical adaptation, with David Kazganich directing. In 2012, Kazganich dropped out and Cary Fukunaga signed on to direct, and he later dropped out as well. I think you can see where this is going. Yeah, this adaptation was in development hell for quite a long time. So much so that I lost all faith in its ever coming out. Even Stephen King had his doubts. And then Andy Muschietti, who had already made a fan of Guillermo del Toro with his debut short film, Mama, was brought in. Originally it was only going to be one film, and boy, they had a hard enough time with 3 hours. I can only imagine stuffing the entire story into 2. But thankfully, Warner Brothers came to their senses and decided to make it 2 movies, with the first film focusing on the losers' first battle with Pennywise as children, and the second would be with the losers all grown up.
They gotta do the adults.
To portray Pennywise originally was going to be Will Poulter. Now, this may not be fair to him as an actor, but I do not see it at all. But then again, Fukunaga was very pleased with his audition, and admittedly, I can't say I've seen much of his work. Also, besides weirdos like Tim Curry, there's not many actors I can really imagine playing such a daunting character, such as Pennywise the Dancing Clown. But he dropped out due to scheduling conflicts. He was replaced by Bill Skarsgård from the famous Skarsgård family of actors. And not gonna lie, when I saw this promotional image, I thought he looked fucking stupid. It was too overtly scary looking, and Pennywise chose a clown as his primary form because it was easier to entice children. But if a kid sees this, it's just gonna run the other way. Also, he looked like a weird porcelain doll. I just wasn't impressed. In fact, I was not a fan of any of the promotional material I saw. Even the trailer didn't do it for me. And by the time I went in to see the flick, my expectations were quite low. And I ended up loving it. It was everything I wanted in an It movie. The acting was superb across the board, it had some good scares, and Bill Skarsgård immediately made his iteration of It into a new icon of horror. And while I'm still not a huge fan of the design, it grew on me throughout the running length. And Skarsgård comes damn close to the intensity of Pennywise in the book. Curry is maybe a tad more book accurate as a whole, but he didn't deliver the scares anywhere near as well. They're totally different takes on the character, and they're both great. So it's up to the individual to decide which take on the dancing clown they prefer. The rest of the cast is great too, with Jaden Martell as Ben, Jeremy Taylor as Ben, Wyatt Oleff as Stan, Sophia Lillis as Bev, Finn Wolfhard as Richie, Jack Grazer as Eddie, and Chosen Jacobs as Mike. They don't feel too dissimilar from friend groups I had at that age, and I'm somewhat ashamed to say, but I was definitely the Richie.
Have you ever heard of a staph infection? Also, staph infection.
In fact, if you watch a series on this channel called James and Friends, you can see that I probably still am the Richie of my friend group. I say I'm ashamed because Jesus Christ, he's an annoying little shit.
Wait, can only virgins see this stuff? Is that why I'm not seeing this shit?
Part of me just sees the kid from Stranger Things and every other nostalgic 80s property in glasses making crass jokes, but that's not really on him. It's not his fault he's a good actor and is hot shit right now. And his characterization in this film is fine and makes sense. He's a kid trying to make jokes at every possible opportunity. Of course he can be annoying. All the kids do well, in fact. Andy Muschietti made it a point that the kids all hung out prior to shooting to become real friends, like with the 1990 version, and you can see that chemistry on screen. Most of them have well-defined arcs, which is surprising that they could fit all of that into a 2-hour running time, whilst also having a killer clown going apeshit. They're a big reason why the coming-of-age angle was pulled off so well, even better than the miniseries if you ask me. Except Mike is a pretty big asterisk. Yeah, a big criticism from King fans was the fact that the character of Mike was really scaled back. Whereas in the book and even the miniseries, he was the most important member of the Losers Club. He knew the history of the town and by extension, Pennywise, and that gave the losers vital information, and he was the one who stayed in Derry to continue his research and man the lighthouse, so to speak. But he's just a farm boy who shows up in this version, and it's not much better in part 2, but I'll leave it there for now. It's kind of a shame because some of my favorite chapters from the book were the ones focused on Mike and his family. I get why they did it because the scene where the gang learns more about the town is before Mike shows up proper, so it made more sense to just give that role to Ben for the sake of pacing, but still. Though Mike does get a pretty good fight sequence with Henry Bowers, played by Nicholas Hamilton. Too bad he lost his N-word pass. Damn cancel culture. Also, I don't like how they kind of make Beverly into a damsel in distress that gets the band back together, especially right after they give us what is, in my opinion, the best scene in the movie where she's attacked by her dad. It's so tense, disturbing, and legitimately scary. I guess they thought since there's no spooky clown, they didn't need any annoying sound effects. Oh, fucking hell! Beverly is such a strong character in the book and film thanks to Sophia Lillis' performance, and it's a little insulting to see her done so dirty. Also, they're looking up her dress, and Ben, I think that's sexual harassment, buddy. Also, I hate that they had to have a big breakup in the first place. It's honestly a little baffling.
Georgie is dead. Stop trying to get us killed too.
Georgie's not dead.
You couldn't save him, but you can still save yourself.
No. Take it back. You're scared, and we all are, but take it back.
Bill! When will you learn? When will you learn that your actions have consequences?
They have so much material to gloss over within this 2-hour-long film that only covers one half of the book, so I don't understand why they have to waste so much time on something so predictable and lazy. A big selling point for the cast is how well they work off one another.
And by the time we hit this combination, it was so clear that these were the guys. I never thought we'd get that chemistry in a group.
So let's separate them. Great idea. It doesn't even have time to go anywhere since they get back together pretty soon afterwards, so it's redundant too. I like the little montage, but I don't have much else positive to say about it. And while I'm bitching, the jump scares do irritate me to no end. I understand that jump scares can be done well, but this film's approach to them are so cookie cutter, lazy, and unnecessary. This is a point I'm shamelessly stealing from YMS, but take the scene where Georgie, played by Jackson Scott, gets unalived. The film's introduction of one of the greatest villains ever, in my opinion, is ruined by a loud monster noise when he opens his eyes. And it's such a shame because it could easily work without it. Or if they needed a noise or a sound effect, why not something more subtle? Was it necessary to give Grandma a heart attack in the theater?
Where's my shoe?
Give me a lush, creepy atmosphere any day over a lazy-ass jump scare. They don't scare you, they startle you, which is why so many modern horror movies are quickly forgotten about the week after release. And films like The Exorcist, Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, Eraserhead, and The Shining, sorry Steven, still hold up all these years later and are still scary because they deal with human emotions so well, while being creepy as hell at the same time. I'm not saying every horror movie needs to be a deep reflection of the AIDS epidemic, childhood trauma, or becoming a parent. But so many producers treat horror as a formulaic cash cow they can milk instead of a genre that can inspire so much creativity. Sure, we still get some good stuff, and not everything back in the day was as good as many like to remember. I won't deny that. The Lighthouse is one of the best films, horror or not, to come out within the last 10 years. Barbarian just came out. The Hellraiser reboots was really solid, and while it's not exactly new, Let the Right One In, the original, not the fucking remake, is one of my favorite horror films of all time. And it came out during the dirge that was the late 2000s sea of Platinum Dunes remakes. But for every Let the Right One In, it seems we get 37 more entries into the Conjuring universe of films. God, the MCU and its consequences have been a disaster for cinema. I go on this tangent because while I do still like this film, I believe it will age poorly because of its overuse of jump scares and how they use those jump scares. I mean, it's already aging for me because I didn't enjoy watching this movie this time around anywhere near as much as I did the last time I did. Part of that is reading the book and becoming one of those guys.
The book is so much better.
But to quote YMS again, because I believe he's correct and he's someone who's never even read the book, I believe this is a great film trapped in a good film. There are weird attempts at humor like with Richie being Richie.
Derry started as a beaver trapping camp.
Still is, am I right, boys?
Which I don't mind as much as other people since it's true to the character and Finn Wolfhard does well. What I find more questionable is the New Kids on the Block references. It reminds me of some of the worst moments of Stranger Things when whole scenes revolve around a nostalgic relic like New Coke. The book and even the miniseries never did that for the 50s. The closest they came was with the film I Was a Teenage Werewolf, but that came back again in the plot and wasn't just pandering to the older members of King's audience. And I'm not against 80s references. I love the scene where they're cleaning Beverly's bathroom to 6 Different Ways by The Cure. I like the inclusion of XTC's Dear God, and Beverly has posters of the Psychedelic Furs, Susie and the Banshees, and the Replacements. Damn, she's got good taste. The original soundtrack by Benjamin Wallfish is pretty good too, though nothing will stick with me like the main theme from the miniseries. This shit lives rent-free in my mind. The tracks I like the most by far the soft and simple ones like Beverly, January Embers, and Blood Oath. But tracks like Return to Neibolt are also good and are great at building tension. There's a lot of great subtle details and references in this film too, like the standpipe, the he thrusts his fist tongue twister,
against the post and still insists he sees the ghost.
and the turtle.
Oh, dude! Are we supposed to see a turtle in this movie? In this game?
Dude, there's a turtle scene in this.
It's a sign!
They obviously can't get to everything, but the references go a long way in pleasing a king nerd like myself. Lest we forget, a 32-year-long payoff to the They All Float line had me and the homies going, I also like little details in the cinematography, like when Stan picks up and fixes the painting with the creepy woman on it, and it goes from a Dutch angle to normal, like Pennywise is actually looking out of it. It's little tricks like that that can really hook you into a movie, without you even realizing it, and I'm a big fan. The ending is great, I love the kids' beatdown on Pennywise, but what I really like is Bill coming to terms with Georgie's death.
I love you, Billy.
Love you too. But you're not Georgie.
Not gonna lie, I low-key thought that they killed the real Georgie at first, even though it would make no sense at all. Jaden Martell sells the performance and you really feel for him. It's a well done scene. Overall, I do like this movie. And spoiler alert, it's the best adaptation we'll talk about today. The casting is sublime, the characters are rich, and it can be scary at times, when the film isn't getting in its own way with jump scares. Besides that, there's some funny little nitpicks like Pennywise moving around the walls like a PNG, reshoots done on a really fake looking obvious green screen, and this image is something I'll never forget, but it's still a good time. I just wish it didn't feel the need to pander to the brain-dead crowd who thinks that loud noises equal scary. It really sullies what could have been a modern horror classic. The almost inevitable sequel following the losers as adults taking down Pennywise is on the table, but Warner Brothers were holding off until they knew the first one was successful. And boy, was it. It smashed several records, becoming one of the highest grossing R-rated films of all time. It helped prove to studios that you don't need to pander to the MPAA to get that elusive PG-13 for a film to be a hit. And now we have many more R-rated films coming out today that recently, only a few years ago, would have been forced into a PG-13 mold when that's not always viable. I probably can't praise it solely for this, but it was undeniably a part of the reason why. And I was super stoked for the sequel. This was probably my most anticipated movie of 2019, and it came out around my birthday, so my sister bought us tickets as a gift, and while I kinda liked it, I walked out of there incredibly disappointed. Because despite my own personal enjoyments, I can look at things objectively enough to know that this movie is not good. One of the most intelligently crafted novels of all time was turned into a poorly paced mess that didn't know how to end. But there's positives, and the positives are so great that I can almost turn a blind eye to the numerous problems this film has. First things first, and it sounds like a broken record here, but it's true, the cast. James McAvoy as Bill. This guy always understands the assignment when it comes to portraying iconic characters from books. Jessica Chastain as Beverly, Bill Hader as Richie, Isaiah Mustafa as Mike, Jay Ryan as Ben, James Ransone as Eddie, and Andy Bean as Stan. They're all fantastic and are bringing their all, especially Bill Hader, who shows off his chops that people forget he has, since when they think of him, they see Stefan.
As you walk in, you'll be handed a glass of champagne. Or is it piss?
He proved himself in a way that I haven't seen since Marlon Wayne's performance in Requiem for a Dream. His portrayal of Richie also improves on the book by adding subtext, and not so subtle subtext, of Richie being in love with Eddie and hiding his sexuality.
Truth or dare? Oh, you wouldn't want anyone to pick truth though, would you, Richie? You wouldn't want anyone to know what you're hiding.
You're gay! He's gay! I'm not gay. He's gay!
Which adds more depth to character and can even improve the original book a little bit if you apply that interpretation to it. Speaking of the F-slurs, the opening scene is also really good. I remember there's some controversy on Twitter about it because it's Twitter, what do you expect? That site's a fucking dumpster fire. It showcased a gross scene of bigotry that is incredibly hard to watch. A bunch of hick homophobes who definitely browse 4chan assault a gay couple, one of whom looks like Ben Affleck, just for enjoying the penis.
We need to talk logistics. Ooh, how romantic.
Romantic? What's so fucking romantic, huh?
And for being sassy.
Meg Ryan called. She wants her wig back.
My name's Tom Sweeney and I hate the gays.
I can see why this would be too disturbing for someone, especially if they've had to deal with that kind of bigotry before in their own life, but the film is rated R, the scene was in the book, and Pennywise killing a gay character and influencing the town to commit such acts like he did in the book is not out of character in the slightest. It hurts to watch, but that's the point. The scene is supposed to make you uncomfortable. I wouldn't know what to make of you if you weren't, and it's done well. Too bad the rest of the film isn't.
Fuck you, dude.
I thought the sex scenes were really good.
I need to discuss how dirty they did my man Mike here. I can somewhat forgive chapter 1, but that's under the assumption that they would stay more true to the character in the second.
No, it's just Chuck Testa.
Now, they didn't fundamentally change him as a character, but they changed just enough to make him fucking putrid. I remember there were rumors that they were going to make him a drug addict, and I'm sorry to say, but this might have been true considering some of his actions in this movie. After their losers reunite at the restaurant, they immediately turn on Mike because they're scared about facing off with Pennywise.
You lied to us. That's not okay. Yeah, first words out of your mouth should have been like, hey man, you want to come to Derry and get murdered? Because then I would have said no.
Which makes no sense. Why did they all have such visceral reactions to Mike's phone calls, yet still went out of their way to get to Dare in such short notice if the situation wasn't dire? Even if they couldn't remember exactly why, they must have known something was up. And even if not, they didn't need to immediately turn on him. It's such a lazy way to move the plot forward. Is it more realistic? Probably yes. Is it true to the characters? God, no. They wouldn't just turn on one of their own for any reason, let alone what Mike did. Anyway, after this, Bill is the only one who even considers hearing him out about the whole thing after the rest of them bail. And after they get back to his place, Mike fucking drugs him so he can see a vision of the ritual of Chud.
Did you put something in my drink? That's, it's a root. You drugged me? No, you drugged me? It's a root with properties. It's just a microdose of what the Shakapiwa gave me. Why would you do that? To open my eyes. I don't feel real good.
This is Bill Denborough here, by far the most heroic of the Losers Club. He shouldn't need to see a psychedelic vision to want to take down Pennywise. And this is Mike Hanlon. He shouldn't be fucking drugging people, he's not Bill Cosby. Also, the only reason the other losers didn't get out of Dodge is because Beverly has a vision herself. And in this vision, all of them will die like Stan did if they leave Derry.
It's the place that Stanley wound up. That's how he ended.
We were all touched by it. Changed. Deep down, like an infection or a virus. What Beverly sees, it will come to pass. It's what'll happen to all of us eventually.
So the only reason they even try to take down Pennywise in the first place is for purely self-motivated reasons. And even that doesn't stop Richie from trying to ditch later in the movie.
I should go back there. I just fucking left them in alerts, man. I should go back there. What the fuck you talking about? Fuck that. Fuck them. I got dates in fucking Reno, man.
So not only is he selfish, he's fucking stupid too. But if he didn't try to leave, then he wouldn't be there to save Mike from a grown-up and still malted Henry Bowers, played by T.J. Grant. Plot contrivance, anyone? What happened from the first film to this one for the writing to fall apart so spectacularly, and to utterly misunderstand these characters on such a fundamental level? Well, the first film was written by Cary Fukunaga, Chase Palmer, and Gary Doberman. The latter only came in later to rework the script after Fukunaga had left the project. But for this one, Gary Doberman has sole writing credits on the screenplay. And judged on the quality of this script, it makes me wonder if the only reason the first one was as good as it was because of the base Palmer and Fukunaga laid out. Was it Doberman who came in later and added all the lame jump scares and what have you? Is that fair? Probably not. He probably had his fair share of good ideas too, but based on this screenplay and his prior work, can you blame me here? Also, by the way, he signed on to write, produce, and direct the new adaptation of Salem's Lot, so that's probably gonna suck too. A big thing I hate is that they decide to split up for some inexplicable reason.
We need to split up. You each need to find your artifact. Alone. That's important.
Though that alone isn't what annoys me. They did it in the book too, because they need to regain their old memories, which fit in the book's motif of coming of age. In the film, they need to regain artifacts of their youth, and it basically serves the same narrative purpose. Symbolism, metaphors, all that good stuff. It's not done quite as well, but it's excusable. What isn't excusable is the characters pointing out how bad of an idea it is for them to split up, but continuing to do so regardless.
I gotta say, statistically speaking, you look at survival scenarios, we're gonna do much better as a group.
Yeah, splitting up would be dumb, man. Okay, we gotta go together, all right? We were together that summer, right?
Well, now we're done with that part. Let's split up anyways. Good thing we acknowledged the tropes of the genre. Heck yeah! Now we can follow every cliche without feeling guilty. Yeah. Let's go get murdered now. That's good. What?
They say they have to because they split up for a while when they were kids.
We were together that summer, right?
No. Not that whole summer.
Awesome, so they're bringing back a contrived part from the first movie to justify another contrived part of this movie. Great! Also, if you want to indulge in a cliche, trope, or pastiche, fucking go for it. All storytelling is built on one thing or another, and as long as you don't do anything stupid or boring with it, then I can excuse it. I like subversion as much as the next guy, but it's not always necessary. But you can't indulge in these things while at the same time making it painfully obvious you're embarrassed enough by it to have one of your characters mention the trope in question and about how stupid it is. You're not being smart, you're being a pretentious ass. People ask me why I don't like films like Scream, and it's because I don't like being talked down to in the theater by a screenwriter who thinks he's more intelligent than he really is. And I get so angry because the majority of the film is different members of the Losers Club on their own, not able to bounce off the others. They have such great chemistry in this film, and I'd rather see more of them together than each of them in their own Twilight Zone episodes that aren't even scary. Not Lin Shaye is doing a good job in Beverly segments, but they turn it into a CGI thing off screen. Instead, God forbid we do something practical for once. I probably enjoy Richie's the best because we get a flashback scene of him obviously having a bit of a crush on Henry Bauer's cousin. This scene also allows Henry's actor to finally say a slur like he did in the book.
Get the fuck out of here, fast!
But they then cut to a scene in broad daylight that is so incredibly bright that it hurts my eyes. And I don't see how this could be scary to anyone other than a very young child. And is it just me, but with this lighting, Pennywise just looks kinda strange. There's a couple of scenes like this, and they're all jarring. In the first movie, I think there was only one, and the day was slightly overcast, and the lighting didn't rate my eyes as much. It looked good. This does not. Also, what was the point of bringing back that face other than fan service? Hey guys, sorry for the different sounding audio here, but I just realized while editing the voiceover that I forgot to read an entire paragraph of my script. How am I this stupid? What the fuck? Like in the first film, there's a lot of weird uses of humor and jokes at points where they probably shouldn't be.
Who killed a psychotic clown before he was 14?
Me.
Who stabbed Bowers with a knife he pulled out of his own face?
Also me.
Who married a woman 10 times his own body mass?
Me.
Yeah.
Which I don't hate as much as I probably should because I find a decent chunk of the humor funny. Like, I'm sorry, but this is just etch-a-sketched into my brain now. This is like something out of Evil Dead. I can't not love it. Though it's mainly thanks to Bill Hader stealing every scene he's in.
No, I got married.
Richie, I don't believe it.
When? You not hear this? No. Oh, you know I got married?
No.
Yeah, no, me and your mom are very, very happy right now. She'll put her arm around me, and she'll whisper to me, she'll go,
but I can't deny it's tone of whiplash, and I can see why it pisses people off.
just trying to add some levity to this shit. I'll go fuck myself.
Like in the scene where Eddie gets barfed on by a leper, and they just inexplicably play Angel of the Morning by Julie Newton. I remember when Red Letter Media reviewed this hunk of junk on Half in the Bag when it came out, Jay offered this explanation, and I think I agree with him.
Was this supposed to be scary? They realized it looks kind of silly. It looks very like Evil Dead 2. So let's just drop the song in.
We've got more questions than Prometheus.
Hell, there's even just full-blown references to much better horror media, like Pennywise using Stan's head and turning it into the head crawler thing from The Thing just outright. I mean, it's not even subtle.
You gotta be fucking kidding.
You gotta be fucking kidding.
Also, this film has a running gag of Bill, the writer, the Stephen King insert, not being able to write an ending.
In my book, the ending is terrible.
It was so scary.
And the ending sucked?
Yeah, it did. I'm sorry.
Very subtle, Gary. Next, you'll tell me Nightmare on Elm Street 2 has a few gay undertones. I not only disagree with the sentiments about King's endings, because I believe it is highly over-exaggerated. When you've written as much as Stephen King has, there's bound to be some blunders. He'll probably tell you that himself. And because Stevie is very vocal in his dislike of outlining stories, it's easy to point to one ending or another of his that's half-baked. But I can name you example after example of King endings that are fantastic. Pet Sematary, The Body / Stand By Me, The Shining, Cujo, Thinner, The Shawshank Redemption, I can go on. And you gotta give King himself credit for running with this joke in his very memorable cameo.
You, want me to sign it for you?
Nah, I didn't like the ending.
But if I was a writer on the caliber of Stephen King, love him or hate him, and the hack who wrote The Fucking Nun tried to insult my writing, I'd be offended to the point of violence. I think they realized there would be some disconnect, so they made sure to include some scenes of the kids from the first film, which I won't complain about because those kids did great. But the difference 2 years can make in the throes of teenage adolescence is something else, because Finn Wolfhard and Jack Grazer have obviously fallen victim to some awkward looking CGI, with every line spoken by them sounding like it's ADR'd by a deep-faked member of the Losers Club.
Now that's a cool feature. What happens when you put your hand on the other pillar, Professor?
Okay, you see, this is exactly why there are safety codes, why we have permits. This place is a death trap, you understand that?
Well, it's a work in progress, okay, Eddie?
Just so you know, if I get hurt, you're reliable. And also, what is this? The Switchman Iron Maiden?
It's not just me, right? It sounds super weird and artificial. I'm sure it's because their voices dropped and they've grown a considerable amount, but there must have been something else they could have done. Hell, I honestly would have been fine with just some light makeup. Child actors grow up in age, and I don't think many of us would have minded if they looked a bit different, because what we have still looks different, but instead of the actors looking a bit older, they look like they come from the uncanny valley. Also, the music is much worse in this movie. They reuse a lot of the best tracks from the first film, but the new compositions are far less memorable, and I'm not lying, they use a lot of distortion where they shouldn't, so it sounds more like a YTP than the score for a major motion picture a lot of the time. It hurts my ears, it goes into full-blown ear rape at points. Just listen to the track Come Home. It's bad enough you have to continue using these terrible jump scares, but is it necessary for me to be deaf walking out of the theater too? Sometimes I'm not even sure if it was a stylistic choice, or if it was recorded and mastered by someone who was a big fan of the gain knob. I don't understand why. It was also done by Benjamin Wallfish. Was some producer talking in his ear all sensual-like, telling him to make the jump scares even worse? And that ending is a big oof. So the losers find their way into its lair, burn their MacGuffins they wasted 2 hours getting, only to find out that the ritual of Chud doesn't actually work like Michael led them all to believe, because he decided to scratch out the part in the old legend vase thing where it shows the natives being ripped from limb because they didn't believe hard enough, apparently.
Tell them why your silly little ritual didn't work. Tell them it's all just, what's the word, Eds? Gazebo.
Fuck, Mikey, you lied to us again? No, but they didn't believe. They didn't believe they could kill him. That's why it didn't work back then. Are you fucking kidding me, Mike? We hurt him. Fuck.
What the actual shit? Mike is supposed to be the guy who manned the lighthouse and researched more than getting high with some Native Americans one time. And even if the natives originally failed, he wouldn't just hide the fact from his friends. If he didn't know exactly what to do, he would tell them. He wouldn't just lead them into their likely deaths because he had a hunch the natives didn't really believe like they did. After this, the losers run around like a Benny Hill sketch away from Pennywise, the giant dancing clown spot. What the fuck? Now, I obviously understand the reasoning here. A big reason why people didn't like the 1990 miniseries was the fact that at a certain point, Tim Curry, by many accounts the best thing about it, kind of just disappears and this thing took his place. So they thought, why not combine the Spider of the Book / miniseries with Bill Skarsgård's now already iconic take on Pennywise? But it's just a little too ridiculous for me to take seriously. If anything, I'd say they should have gone with a full-blown Lovecraft-inspired take on the spider. Make it this huge beast that the losers can't even get a good look at because it shows them at least partially its true form, with some tentacles or spider's legs coming out here or there to try and grab and kill them. And Stephen King was a huge fan of Lovecraft, and it was undeniably a big influence on the story of It, so why not? They could even keep Bill Skarsgård to voice the beast. Pennywise still talked even in the form of the spider in the book. even if telepathically. And we can still enjoy the actual clown form Pennywise in the scenes where Ben and Beverly save each other with the power of love like in Nightmare on Elm Street 2. How have I mentioned that movie more than twice in one video? At a certain point it becomes a me problem.
Alright, man, what do you want me to do? Get inside my body.
But that's nothing compared to how they actually defeat Pennywise. In the book, Bill and Richie engage in the ritual of Chud, leaving their physical bodies and battle within its mind, biting its tongue until they return to their physical bodies and Bill rips its heart out with his own bare hands. Now it's hard to explain, let alone film in live action. But with today's special effects and with what CGI can do, I'm sure they could have at least come close, even if in an abstract way. Looking back, I can't really blame Tommy Lee Wallace too much for doing something different with the ending of the miniseries. He didn't have much choice considering what he had to work with on a TV budget. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't good and it could have been done much better, but it was at least understandable. But don't try and tell me with an almost $80 million budget, they couldn't even attempt it. No, instead they forego the ritual of Chud and instead bully it to death?
There's more than one way to make someone small.
Make him believe that he is.
What? Make it believe that he is.
Oh, me, small.
A headless boy. Imposter!
You're a fucking bully!
You're just a fucking clown! Clown! A dumb fucking clown!
I really wish I was kidding here, guys. If only they could tell Eddie that before he got fucking iced.
I think I killed it. I did. I think I killed it for real. Oh. Eddie. Richie.
Due to his own recklessness, in fact. In fact, this change kind of undermines his death in the book. In the book, Eddie was the reason why Bill and Richie didn't get lost within its mind because he shoved his arm down its throat and sprayed his inhaler, only to have his arm bitten off and die within its lair. It acted as a sacrifice for Eddie's character, who up to that point had been a meek hypochondriac. But now in this movie, Eddie just gloats a bunch like a jackass and gets impaled. Hey Gary, what's that you read about King's endings again? Because this makes even King's worst endings look like withering fucking heights. But anyway, after they escape its lair in the house on Neibolt Street, we get some good stuff. Right when the movie ends, we have some fantastic scenes of the losers revisiting the quarry and a conversation with Bill and Mike discussing their losing their memories, but not all of them, remembering their friendship and bond.
Why do you think we're not forgetting? Like last time?
Maybe because it's dead. Or maybe because we have more we want to remember than we want to forget.
And it was revealed that Stan sent all of them letters posthumously before he Minecrafted himself, saying he was too scared to face it again and that by removing himself from the equation, it would give the others a better shot at defeating him.
You're probably wondering why I did what I did. It's because I knew I was too scared to go back. And if we weren't together, if all of us alive weren't united, I knew we'd all die. So, I made the only logical move. I took myself off the board.
Now, I mean this totally sincerely and unironically. These are fantastic decisions that, in my opinion, actually improve upon Stephen King's original work, like with the added subplot of Richie hiding his homosexuality. It gives Stan's decision to kill himself far more purpose, and the losers remembering their friendship despite forgetting everything else is a nice touch because that was something I never liked in the original book. But yeah, that was It Chapter 2, and I'm very mixed on it, as you can tell. The cast and their performances are some of the best I've seen in horror, there's some cool set pieces, and I like how they changed some things from the monolithic book this film is based upon. But at the same time, some of the changes are moronic, especially what they did to Mike.
Look how they massacred my boy.
The script is a tone-deaf clusterfuck that seems to hold contempt for the source material it's based on. It has this huge running length, but it can't really properly justify it. And it just kind of pisses me off while watching because this duology is now so lopsided. Would it have killed Warner Brothers to get Chase Palmer and Cary Fukunaga back? They seem to have known what they were doing. But at the same time, I can't lie. It's entertaining. If I turn my brain off and only focus on the things I like, I can have a halfway enjoyable experience before falling asleep halfway through because the melatonin kicked in faster than I was expecting. And if you enjoyed the previous film, I would say you should give this one a shot, even though looking back the first part actually works okay as a standalone film. So if you just want to stick with that first one and stop, I can't really blame you, especially if you're a big Stephen King fan. But what's done is done, and if nothing else, these two It films are second only to the Conjuring universe in terms of modern horror flicks when it comes to popularity and box office, which is only slightly depressing. And Andy Muschietti has since gotten swept up in cape shit and is now directing The Flash, which looks only kind of awful. But on a somewhat positive note, there's going to be a prequel series entitled Welcome to Derry, which is going to be on HBO Max with Andy Muschietti and his sister Barbara serving as showrunners. The good thing is Gary Doberman is nowhere to be found. The bad news is the other showrunner is Jason Fox, and his resume does not inspire confidence. But I'll keep an open mind because I at the very least trust the Muschiettis themselves, and there's still a lot of good stuff from the book that even with the 5 hours of the two films combined, they have yet to get to. Hate to cut in once again while editing, but the other day I read an article that apparently Bill Skarsgård likely won't be reprising his role for the series. I don't know, I guess after Eternals and Devil All the Time they can't afford him anymore. I'm mixed on this. On one hand, I wouldn't mind seeing a new interpretation, and given that Pennywise is a shapeshifter, it would make some sense that he wouldn't always look like the way he does in the two prior films. But on the other hand, now it likely won't be as cohesive as a spin-off series. So I guess we'll see how it goes. And hey, why not try and tie in Mike Flanagan's upcoming Dark Tower series in some way, since he's been talking about tying that series into other Stephen King books that take place within the multiverse of the man's bibliography. I think that'll be cool to see. So what's my conclusion here? I'll be honest, I'm almost 10,000 words into the script, and by this point I have long since forgotten. The adaptations of It are weird because none of them are amazing. I mean, at best they're about a 7 out of 10, but most of the time they're far lower. But they're all important nuggets of horror that have left a big impact on those who have seen them, especially if you were a young child when you first saw them. I'm sure what the miniseries did to me as a young whippersnapper, the new films are sure to do to a new generation of horror fans. But when you remove things like the performances of Pennywise, what we are left with are kind of mediocre, at best, horror films with an exemption of maybe the 2017 one. It kind of upsets me that we have yet to receive a truly great adaptation of what is arguably Stephen King's finest work. I wish we had an adaptation on par with something like Carrie, The Shining, which technically isn't a good adaptation, I'm aware, but it's so well made I have a hard time caring. Stand By Me, The Shawshank Redemption, Misery, The Green Mile, hell, or even The Mist or Dr. Sleep. Yes, I do think Dr. Sleep is better than the It films, fucking fight me. At this point, just let Frank Darabont and Mike Flanagan do King adaptations. They seem to be the only guys still in the game who can do it right. But hey, if it took Dune 51 years to get an adaptation truly worthy of Frank Herbert's text, then maybe all is not lost. We'll just have to give it another 19 years. God damn it. Hey guys, as I'm sure you all could tell, this video was a massive undertaking that has been in the works since last year. If you could do me a favor by leaving me a like, comment, subscription, or even just sharing the video, it would really help me out in surviving the dreaded YouTube algorithm. But anyways, take it easy, party people.